My name is Sarah. At 58, you learn that the body keeps its own clock, and mine was telling me it was well past midnight. A fine constellation of flour dusted my forearms, and a deep, satisfying ache had settled into the small of my back, the familiar signature of a 14-hour day. The bakery was quiet, filled with the gentle ghost of cooling bread. This was my favorite time, when the chaos of the day had settled, and all that was left was the work itself, pure and honest. I was in the small office, a room that was more of an oversized closet, getting ready to close out the books for the day before heading home. I sat down at the worn wooden desk and clicked the mouse, waking the computer screen. Just a quick check of the emails, I told myself. Then home. Most of it was junk invoices from suppliers, marketing spam, a newsletter about new gluten-free yeasts. My eyes were scanning, ready to click away, when a subject line stopped my cursor cold. It was stark, black, and utterly out of place. Official notice. Termination of employment. For a moment, I just stared. It had to be spam. Some kind of phishing attempt designed to look official. I almost deleted it. But something about the sender's address made me pause. It wasn't some garbled string of letters. It was a name. Barlow, Finch and Associates, a law firm. Curiosity, tinged with a faint, unplaceable unease, made me click. The email was formatted with a cold, perfect precision. There was a logo at the top, a shield with scales of justice that seemed to mock me from the screen. My eyes scanned the opening line. "Dear Miss Miller," it began. Not "Dear Sarah," not "Dear Mom." "Miss Miller." The formality was a slap. "This letter serves as official notification." I read the words, but my mind refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. It was like trying to read a foreign language I almost knew. The phrases floated in front of me, disconnected. As per a resolution passed by the majority owner of the Rolling Pin Bakery, LLC, my mind started searching for a logical exit ramp. A mistake. Of course, it was a mistake. Jessica must have hired this firm for some other corporate matter, a new lease agreement. Maybe a paralegal had accidentally sent me a standard template from their files. A stupid, careless error. I had just approved the weekly payroll in QuickBooks an hour ago. My name was right there at the top of the employee list. Sarah Miller, head baker. It was a fact, a piece of data. This email was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. Then my eyes caught the next line, the one that vaporized all my excuses. "This action has been authorized on behalf of the majority owner, Miss Jessica Miller." Jessica, my daughter. The words locked into place. The strange language suddenly became brutally, terribly clear. The email was a key, turning in a lock I never knew existed. I read the sentence again, and then a third time. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't a template. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message, delivered from my daughter to me, through a buffer of lawyers I had never met. The words felt like sterile surgical tools, carefully dissecting a living thing without any regard for the pain. Each legal term was a clean, precise cut. Due to a strategic corporate restructuring aimed at improving operational efficiencies, your position as head baker has been deemed redundant. Redundant. After 20 years of developing every recipe in this shop, after cashing out my $401k, my entire future, to get the loan for the down payment, after working holidays, weekends, and nights until my hands were raw and my feet were swollen, I wasn't a person, a mother, a founder. I was a line item that had been cut. I thought of Jessica just last week, tasting a new batch of lemon zest icing and telling me, "It's perfect, Mom. You're a genius." Was that a lie? Was she already planning this, even as she smiled at me? My mind began to race, grasping for a reason. Why? Why would she do this? The business was thriving. Why now? That consultant, Bryce, he had talked about trimming the fat. I just never imagined he was talking about me. And why like this? Why through an email from strangers? It was the cowardice that landed the final blow. The chilling realization that my own daughter couldn't, or wouldn't, even face me to tell me my life was being dismantled. My gaze drifted to the final paragraph. It was the kill shot. Effective immediately, your access to the premises, email systems, and all other company assets is terminated. A third-party security firm has been engaged to oversee the transition. You will be contacted separately regarding the collection of any personal items. Effective immediately. The air in the office suddenly felt thin and cold. I was no longer an owner in her sanctuary. I was a trespasser, an intruder. The flower on my arms, once a badge of honor, now felt like evidence of a crime. My heart, which had been pounding in my ears, suddenly felt like it had been encased in ice. It didn't break. It just sank, a dead weight pulling everything else down with it, into a quiet, dark, and bottomless place. My fingers were numb, clumsy. I fumbled with my phone, my thumb slipping twice on the smooth glass before I managed to pull up Jessica's contact photo. It was from last summer's farmer's market, her face bright with a genuine, unforced smile, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. My daughter. It had to be a mistake. A grotesque, horrific mistake that a simple phone call would unravel. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the familiar, cheerful ringtone. It never came. Instead, a single, sterile beep was followed by a voice. It was Jessica's voice, but flattened and polished, like a river stone. All the warmth had been sanded away. "You've reached the office of Jessica Miller, CEO of the Rolling Pin," it said, the words perfectly enunciated. "Your call is very important to me. Please leave a detailed message, and I'll get back to you at my earliest convenience." Her office? Since when did she have an office? We had an office, a tiny, cluttered room that smelled of cinnamon and old paper. The voicemail she'd had for 10 years was a giggling clip of her saying, "It's Jess, you know what to do." This new message wasn't just professional, it was a fortress, a carefully constructed wall of corporate jargon, and I knew with a sickening certainty that I was on the other side of it. I didn't leave a message. What could I say to a machine that used to be my daughter? My purse was on the desk. I grabbed it, my car keys clinking with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent bakery. I had to see her. I had to look her in the eye. An email, a voicemail, those were things you could hide behind. You can't hide from your own mother standing in front of you. This wasn't her. This was that man, Bryce. I could picture him coaching her, feeding her lines, convincing her this cold, efficient cruelty was just good business. Jessica wouldn't do this. Not my Jess. The 10-minute drive from the bakery to her apartment felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal torment. The familiar streets of our town looked distorted, unreal. My mind was a frantic storm of whys. Why would she do this? She loved the bakery. Why not talk to me? We always talked. Why would she be so cruel? My little girl who once cried for an hour when she accidentally stepped on a snail. It didn't add up. The numbers were wrong. The equation was broken. There had to be a missing piece, something I wasn't seeing. Maybe this was some kind of elaborate, twisted intervention. Maybe she thought I was burning out, working too hard, and this was her brutal way of forcing me to retire. The excuses became more and more frantic, more and more pathetic as I pulled up to her building. Her car wasn't in its usual spot. Of course, she was probably at the bakery, overseeing the coup. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Fine. I would go there. I would face them both. I turned the car around, tires squealing in protest, and drove back toward the place I had just left, my place. When I pulled into the back lot, I saw a strange car parked near the delivery entrance, a dark blue sedan I didn't recognize. A light was on in the kitchen. Good. Someone was there. I walked to the heavy steel door, the same door I had unlocked before dawn every morning for 5 years. I slid my key, the original key from the day we first opened, into the lock. It didn't turn. I jiggled it, thinking it was stuck. Nothing. I pulled it out, checked the teeth, it was the right key. I tried again, pushing harder, a hot wave of panic rising in my throat. The lock was a solid, unmoving block of metal. It didn't just feel stuck. It felt changed. It had been rekeyed. They had changed the locks. I started banging on the door, the sound echoing in the empty parking lot. "Hello? Is anyone in there? It's Sarah!" After a moment, the lock clicked from the inside. The door opened a few inches, held by a security chain. A man I'd never seen before peered out. He was young, maybe 30, with a tired expression that suggested he didn't want any trouble. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. His voice was neutral, detached. I'm Sarah Miller, I said, my own voice trembling slightly. I own this place. My key isn't working. He didn't look surprised. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes, Miss Miller. We were told you might stop by. He didn't unlatch the chain. We? I asked. Who is we? I need to get inside. I'm the new night manager, he said, and I could see a laminated ID badge clipped to his shirt. My instructions are very clear. I'm not to grant you access to the property. The words hung in the cold night air between us. Instructions. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan, an operation. I was not a person to him. I was a security risk to be managed. Instructions from who? I demanded, though I already knew the answer. From Jessica? My instructions are from the owner, he said, his gaze unwavering. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. He closed the door. The chain rattled, and the deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thud. And just like that, I was in exile. Standing in a dark parking lot, locked out of the building that held my past and my future, shut out by a stranger who was following my daughter's orders. I stumbled back to my car and just stood there on the cold sidewalk, staring at the cheerful, rolling pin logo on the side of the building, the logo I had sketched on a napkin all those years ago. It glowed under the security lights, a beacon for a home that had just banished me. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. How could she do this? To understand how my daughter, the girl whose first word was cookie, could turn into this ruthless stranger, we have to go back to the beginning, to a simple dream and a devastating promise. 5 years ago. The world was different then. The air in my kitchen was warm, thick with the smell of coffee and the promise of a quiet Saturday morning. The betrayal was still just a seed, dormant and buried so deep I couldn't have found it with a shovel. Back then, all I saw was my daughter, Jessica, sitting across from me at the old oak table, her eyes burning with an incandescent light I hadn't seen since she was a little girl who believed in magic. She had just graduated from business school, top of her class, and had a binder in front of her that was at least 3 inches thick. It was her thesis, her manifesto, her Bible. On the cover, in a crisp, professional font, were the words, "The Rolling Pin, a Business Proposal." "The market is wide open, Mom," she said, tapping a paragraph on an open page. "Look, Henderson's Bakery closed last year, and the Sweet Spot is using frozen dough I checked with their supplier. People in this town are desperate for something real, something authentic. We're not just selling cupcakes, we're selling nostalgia. We're selling your recipes." She spoke with a breathless, confident rush, flipping through pages filled with charts, demographic analyses, and 5-year profit projections. This wasn't the spontaneous dream of a child. This was a meticulously researched battle plan. She had analyzed foot traffic on 3 potential Main Street locations. She had spreadsheets comparing the wholesale costs of organic flour versus all-purpose. She had data. It was impressive, and I could feel a familiar swell of pride. This was my daughter, brilliant and driven. Then, she took a deep breath, and the energy in the room shifted. The confident CEO in training vanished, and my little girl was back, her expression vulnerable. "I took the plan to the bank," she said, her voice quiet. 2 banks, actually. They said the proposal was robust and compelling, but without any real-world collateral or a co-signer with significant assets, they wouldn't give me the startup loan. She let the words hang in the air. I knew what was coming. I had a small savings account, but nothing that a bank would call significant assets. I had the house, but it was mortgaged. I had my paycheck from the accounting firm I'd worked at for 30 years, and I had one other thing. The sum total of all those years of work, of packing lunches and commuting in traffic, of staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned, my $401K. I didn't say anything. I just got up, went to the filing cabinet in the hallway, and pulled out my latest statement from Vanguard. I sat back down and placed the single sheet of paper on the table, next to her 3-inch binder. The 2 documents looked like they were from different planets. Her binder was the future, full of color and hope. My statement was the past, black and white, a stark accounting of a life spent being careful. The number at the bottom of the page was solid. Not enough to make me rich, but enough for a quiet retirement. Enough to know that I would never be a burden on my daughter. It was a fortress I had built around my old age, brick by painstaking brick. "Jess," I said softly, "do you know what this is? This is everything. If I take this money out, there's a massive early withdrawal penalty. Then there are the taxes. I'd lose almost 40% of it right off the top, and once it's gone, it's gone. There's no getting it back." This was the gentle counter-perspective my own fear was screaming at me. My financial advisor's voice was a ghost in my ear. "Whatever you do, Sarah, don't touch the principal." "I know," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "Mom, I know what I'm asking. If I thought for 1 second this would fail, I would never. But I believe in this. More than anything. I believe in your recipes. And I believe in my plan. I believe in us." I looked at the number on the page. It was an abstract figure, a promise of safety for a future I couldn't picture. Then I looked at my daughter. Her passion was real, tangible. It was right here, sitting at my table, vibrating with life. Why had I saved all that money? So I could sit alone in this house at 75, comfortable and safe, wondering what might have been? Or so I could give my daughter, my only child, the one thing she needed to build her own future? She saw the hesitation in my eyes and leaned forward, her hands covering mine. "What's the bigger risk, Mom?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Letting that money sit in an account, or using it to build something real, something that's ours? A legacy." Legacy. That was the word that did it. The bakery wouldn't just be a business. It would be our story, passed down. My grandmother's recipes, my sacrifice, her ambition. It felt like the most meaningful thing I could ever do. I took a slow breath and slid the Vanguard statement to the side. With one hand, I pulled her binder toward me. It was a silent, simple gesture, but it was the biggest decision of my life. I was pushing my entire future into the center of the table and betting it all on her. Jessica's face crumpled, and a sob of pure, unadulterated joy escaped her lips. She flew out of her chair and threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tight, the stiff pages of her business plan pressed between us. We were both crying, but they were tears of hope. "You won't regret this, Mom," she choked out, her voice muffled by my sweater. "I promise. I will make all of this back for you. And more. I'll make you so proud." I believed her. In that moment, holding my brilliant, beautiful daughter, I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I was not losing a retirement. I was investing in a dream. Our dream. Fast forward 3 years. The dream wasn't a dream anymore. It was a roaring, flour-dusted, caffeine-fueled reality. The rolling pin was the beating heart of Main Street. We had lines out the door every weekend, and the local paper had voted our cinnamon rolls the best in the county. In the kitchen, where I lived and breathed, it was glorious chaos. I was the engine of the ship, deep in the hull, covered in grime and sweat, making sure everything ran. I'd never been happier. But on the deck, a different story was being written. Jessica was born to be the captain. She was brilliant with people, effortlessly charming. She handled the front of the house, the marketing, the ever-important Instagram feed. It made sense. She was young, vibrant, and had a smile that could sell muffins to a man on a diet. I was 56, most comfortable in an apron, and had a permanent dusting of flour in my eyebrows. We had our roles, and for a long time, it felt like a perfect partnership. The first time I felt a crack in that foundation was the day the Oak Creek Ledger came to do a feature story. I was so proud. I spent an hour talking to the young reporter, telling her all about my grandmother's sourdough starter, the one we still used, which we affectionately called Eleanor. I explained the painstaking 3-day process for our croissants. I thought the article would be about the bakery's soul, about our legacy. When the paper came out the next week, Jessica brought a copy into the kitchen, her face glowing. "We're famous," she announced, spreading it out on the stainless steel prep table. There, taking up half the page, was a beautiful, professionally lit photo of Jessica. She was leaning against the front counter, laughing, looking every bit the visionary entrepreneur. The headline read, "Jessica Miller's Sweet Success, How One Woman's Vision is Redefining the Local Palate." I scanned the article, my heart starting to beat a little too fast. My name appeared in the 4th paragraph. Jessica's vision is brought to life. the reporter wrote, with her family's traditional recipes, which are ably prepared in the kitchen by her mother, Sarah. Ably prepared. By her mother, Sarah. It was a verbal pat on the head. I wasn't the co-founder. I wasn't the keeper of the recipes, the head baker who worked 80 hours a week until my bones ached. I was an accessory, an able assistant. It was a small thing, just a handful of words, but it felt like a tiny, sharp stone in my shoe. "It's a great photo of you, honey," I said, forcing a smile as I wiped my hands on my apron. "Isn't it?" "I had them send a proof so I could approve it," she said, beaming. She hadn't noticed the sting in the words, or if she did, she didn't think it mattered. The way it's written," I started, trying to find the right words. "It makes it sound a little like I'm your employee." Jessica finally looked up from the paper, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She put on her patient, placating face, the one she used with difficult customers. "Oh, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's just PR. It's about building a brand. People want a story they can connect with, and the young, savvy founder story is what sells. It's the narrative." The narrative. I was a character in her story, and she had decided my role was a supporting one. It was the first time I realized she saw the bakery not as our story, but as hers. That night, I found myself scrolling through the bakery's Instagram page. It was a beautiful feed, all bright colors and perfectly styled shots of lattes and pastries. But as I scrolled, a pattern emerged. Post after post featured Jessica. Jessica holding a tray of cookies with a caption about a little something I whipped up today. Jessica in a selfie with a local influencer, # Women in Business. A quote, overlaid on a picture of the storefront, read, "I always dreamed of creating a place that felt like home. Jessica Miller, founder." There it was. Not co-founder, founder. It was right there, in glowing pixels for our 10,000 followers to see. The evidence was irrefutable. I was being written out of my own life, one caption at a time, and I was letting it happen. I closed the app. The cheerful, perfect photos burning in my mind. The hurt was a dull ache in my chest. Why did I let it bother me so much? My logical side, the side that loved my daughter, immediately went to work, applying a soothing balm of rationalization. Jessica was better at this. She was building a brand, and I was too proud. My ego was getting in the way of our success. The business was thriving, wasn't it? The money was pouring in, paying back my investment faster than we ever projected. Wasn't that the point? I told myself it was for the good of the business. I told myself that my contribution was in the dough and the batter, not in the headlines. I chose to believe that deep down, she knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. I buried the hurt, packed it down deep, and put on my apron the next morning. It was a sacrifice, I reasoned, and I was good at making sacrifices. I had no idea it was only the first of many. The year the world began to shrink was the year Bryce entered it. Jessica had been talking for weeks about a growth consultant she'd met at a business conference. She spoke of him in reverent tones, using words I didn't fully understand, like angel investor and brand accelerator. I had a feeling of unease, like watching storm clouds gather on a perfectly sunny day. I just didn't know the storm would have a name, and that its name would be Bryce. He arrived at the bakery on a Tuesday morning, not in a delivery truck, but in a black Mercedes that looked like it had been polished with a silk cloth. He was tall, dressed in a suit so sharp it could have cut glass, and had a smile that was perfectly white and utterly without warmth. He walked into our cozy, flower-dusted world and looked around like a biologist studying a quaint but ultimately insignificant ecosystem. "Charming," he said, his eyes scanning the room. A very authentic brand expression, great rustic appeal. He said the word rustic like it was a slightly embarrassing medical condition. Jessica was buzzing at his side, a nervous, excited energy radiating from her. "Bryce, this is my mom, Sarah, the genius I was telling you about." Bryce extended a perfectly manicured hand. His grip was firm and brief. "A pleasure, Sarah. Your daughter is a true visionary. She just needs the right framework to leverage her assets." He looked at me, but he was talking to Jessica. I already felt like I was an object in the room, a piece of the rustic decor. We sat in the tiny office, the three of us crowded together. Bryce didn't sit. He commanded the space, pulling out a slim silver tablet. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries and drill down into the data," he said, his tone brisk. "You have a fantastic product and incredible customer loyalty, but you're thinking like a bakery. I'm here to tell you that you're not in the baking business. You're in the intellectual property business. This isn't a shop, it's a scalable content platform." I must have looked confused, because he smiled that bloodless smile again. "Think of it this way," he explained, as if to a child. "Your grandmother's recipes are your software. The baked goods are just the delivery mechanism. Right now, you're running a single, inefficient server. I want to move you to the cloud. I'm talking franchising. I'm talking a signature line of baking mixes for Whole Foods. I'm talking a YouTube channel." Jessica's eyes were wide, shining with the reflected light of his tablet screen. He was saying all the magic words she'd learned in business school. He was validating her ambition. To her, he sounded like the future. To me, he sounded like a man who had never once felt the simple joy of kneading dough. He swiped through charts and graphs, showing market penetration and growth projections. Then he stopped on a spreadsheet. "Now, let's talk optimization," he said. "Your biggest overhead is ingredients. For instance, this Danish butter you're using. The cost per unit is astronomical." "It's the best," I said, my voice sounding defensive and small. "It has the highest butterfat content. It's what makes the croissants so flaky." Bryce gave a slight, indulgent chuckle. "That's the artisanal mindset, and it's charming, it truly is, but it's not scalable. I have a supplier who can provide a European-style butter blend. The taste is 92% identical in blind taste tests, but it costs 38% less. The consumer palate won't notice, but your profit margin will. 92% identical, 38% less." He talked about my food like it was a math problem. He wanted to take the soul of my work and replace it with a cheaper, almost identical substitute. It was a perfect analogy for him. "People come here because we don't cut corners," I argued, looking at Jessica for support. "They can taste the difference." Before Jessica could answer, Bryce cut in smoothly. "With all due respect, Sarah, you're thinking about the individual croissant. I'm thinking about the 2 million croissants we'll be selling in 5 years. You can't build an empire on expensive butter." He then turned his full attention to Jessica, dismissing me completely. "Your brand identity is strong, Jessica, but it's being throttled by inefficient production. We streamline the back end, leverage your story on the front end, and within 18 months, you're not just the queen of Oak Creek. You're a national name." I watched my daughter. She was nodding, completely mesmerized. He was selling her a version of herself she desperately wanted to be. Powerful, famous, a success. My warnings about quality and authenticity sounded old-fashioned and fearful next to his dazzling promises. After he left, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air like a chemical spill, I tried to talk to her. "Jess, please be careful," I pleaded. "That man doesn't care about our food. He cares about numbers? He wants to turn our bakery into a factory?" "No, Mom," she said, her voice sharp with a new kind of energy. "He wants to turn our bakery into a brand. Don't you see? This is our chance to be huge. He thinks we could be the next Magnolia Bakery." She didn't see the danger. She only saw the dollar signs and the fame. He had shown her a shortcut to the future, and she was going to take it. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. An outsider had walked into our home, and in less than an hour, he had made me the stranger, and himself the visionary. He had found the gap that had been slowly growing between my daughter and me, and he had set up camp right in the middle of it. Bryce had been a ghost for months, a voice on the phone in Jessica's increasingly frequent strategy calls. But when he reappeared in person, he moved with the speed and purpose of a predator that had finally decided to strike. It happened on a Thursday, our busiest day, right in the middle of the lunch rush. The noise was a symphony of chaos, the roar of the espresso machine, the constant ding of the bell on the front door, the shouts of orders back and forth from the kitchen. I was juggling a sheet pan of burning croissants while trying to placate a customer whose custom cake order had been misplaced. I was stressed, sweating, and utterly distracted. It was the perfect time for an ambush. He and Jessica materialized at the kitchen doorway, blocking the path to the front counter. Bryce was holding a thick, blue, official-looking binder. Jessica was wearing a strained, overly bright smile. "Mom, have you got a second?" she asked, already knowing I didn't. "Not really, honey," I said, pulling the croissants from the oven with one hand. "The lunch crowd is insane today. What's up?" "It's important," Bryce said, stepping into my workspace. He opened the binder on the only clear section of countertop, right next to a tray of cooling brownies. "As we move toward franchising, our legal advisors insist we restructure the company. We're dissolving the initial partnership and reforming as a more robust LLC. It's for liability protection. It protects your personal assets from any business debts or lawsuits." He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. He used a lot of reassuring, impenetrable words: asset protection, tax advantages, corporate veil. It was a wall of sound I couldn't possibly scale, not with 3 more orders rattling around in my head. I looked at the pages he had opened. They were dense blocks of tiny, single-spaced text. It would have taken me an hour to read, let alone understand. It was like looking at a foreign language. "I don't have time to read all this right now, Bryce," I said, shaking my head. "Can't we do this tonight, after we close?" "The filing deadline is 5 o'clock today," he said smoothly, tapping his expensive watch. "If we miss it, we have to wait another fiscal quarter. It could set the expansion plan back by months." It was a classic pressure tactic, but I was too overwhelmed to see it. I looked to my daughter for guidance, my daughter, whose face I trusted more than any legal document on earth. "Mom, it's fine," she said, her voice chiming in on cue. She picked up a pen from the counter. "It's just a formality. Bryce's lawyers drew it all up. We both have to sign to make the new company official. It's really no big deal." "No big deal." She said it with such casual, dismissive ease. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Reading every line of that document would have been an act of suspicion. It would have been like demanding a receipt after my own daughter gave me a hug. It would have felt like an accusation. In a family, you run on trust, not fine print. That was the rule I had lived by. It was the rule they were counting on me to follow. Jessica took the pen and pointed to a small, flagged line at the bottom of a page. "You just sign here," she said. Then she flipped a page. "And here." I took the pen from her. My eyes scanned the page I was about to sign. I saw words I didn't recognize: operating agreement, schedule of members, equity distribution. For a fleeting second, a cold sliver of doubt wedged itself in my mind. But then the oven timer let out a shrill, insistent beep, and a server called my name from the doorway. The moment of hesitation was gone, swallowed by the immediate demands of the job. I looked up from the paper and into Jessica's eyes. She was my partner, my daughter, my everything. I scribbled my name on the lines she had indicated. My signature, the one I had practiced since I was 16, looked strange and insignificant on the page, a tiny scribble in a vast ocean of text I didn't understand. The moment the ink was dry, Bryce snapped the binder shut with a sound of crisp, corporate finality. "Excellent," he said, tucking it under his arm. "I'll have my courier run this down to the courthouse immediately." He and Jessica exchanged a look, a quick, triumphant glance that I registered but didn't comprehend. Then they were gone, disappearing back into the chaos of the front of the house. I was left standing there, the now silent oven timer mocking me. I turned, pulled out a tray of muffins, and went back to work. I had no idea what I had just done. I didn't know that in those 2 hurried, thoughtless scribbles, I hadn't just signed a form. I had signed a confession. I had signed a surrender. I had signed away my half of our kingdom for nothing. I had willingly, trustingly, handed my daughter the legal instrument of my own execution, and all she had to do was ask. After I signed those papers, the change wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was a slow, creeping frost. It started in the pantry. I came in one morning to unpack the weekly supply order and stopped dead. Instead of the familiar 50-pound sacks of King Arthur flour, there were generic bleached white bags from a national food distributor. The Belgian chocolate we used, the one with the deep, wine-like notes, had been replaced with waxy, uniform chips that came in a giant cardboard box. I walked into the office, holding a handful of the cheap chocolate like it was evidence in a crime. "Jessica." "There's been a mistake with the Cisco order," I said. She didn't look up from her laptop. "No mistake, Mom. That's the new standard supply. Bryce locked in a fantastic rate. A fantastic rate? I let the waxy chips fall from my hand onto her desk. They made a sound like plastic. Jess, this is garbage. It tastes like wax and sugar. People come to us because we use the best ingredients. This is a betrayal of that promise. For the first time, she looked up, and her eyes were cold, impatient. It's a business decision, not a moral one. The data shows that in a double-blind taste test, only 4% of consumers can tell the difference. But our profit margin on every chocolate chip cookie increases by 12%. The numbers don't lie. The numbers. I was beginning to hate that phrase. It was a shield she used, a wall Bryce had built around her. My 30 years of baking experience, my intimate knowledge of our customers, my own taste buds, none of it mattered when faced with her impenetrable wall of data. Soon, I wasn't just losing control of the ingredients, I was losing my seat at the table. One afternoon, I walked past the office and saw an email on the front counter computer screen. The subject line was Q3 Menu Development and Strategy. It was a meeting invitation. On the list of attendees were Jessica, Bryce, and our two youngest, most ambitious shift leaders. My name was nowhere on it. They were holding a meeting to discuss my life's work, and they hadn't invited me. It was a deliberate, calculated exclusion. I was no longer a partner to be consulted. I was a resource to be managed. Our conversations, once the best part of my day, became brief and transactional. I'd try to ask about her life, about the guy she was dating, and she'd answer in monosyllables before pivoting back to the business. "How was dinner with Michael last night?" I'd ask. "Fine," she'd say, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, did you remember to weigh the flour for the brioche? The new protocol says 16 ounces per loaf." "Exactly. We need to ensure total consistency for the franchise model." She started referring to our customers as users and our recipes as product lines. My kitchen, once a warm, creative space, began to feel like a sterile laboratory. New laminated instruction cards appeared above the workstations with precise, non-negotiable measurements. They replaced my grandmother's real vanilla extract, which we aged ourselves in bottles of bourbon with a synthetic chemical equivalent that came in a plastic jug. It was like they had performed a soul transplant, swapping out a living, beating heart for a cheap, efficient pump. I was being asked not just to accept these changes, but to implement them to be the instrument of my own craft's destruction. I tried one last time. I found her in the office late one night, long after Bryce had gone. I brought her a brownie, one made with the new, cheap ingredients. "Taste this," I said, my voice quiet. She took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "It's good," she said. "A little sweeter, maybe." The focus groups liked that. "It's not good, Jessica, and you know it," I said, my voice shaking with a grief I could no longer contain. "It's flat. It's lifeless. This isn't our food. This isn't the bakery we promised we would build. Don't you remember that day at the kitchen table? Don't you remember what we were fighting for?" She pushed the rest of the brownie away and sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated weariness. It was the sound of a daughter who was tired of her mother's sentimentalities. "I do remember," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I remember a woman who was scared of losing her 401k. And I'm making sure she gets that money back, with a massive return on her investment. You're thinking about the past, Mom. I'm thinking about the future. Bryce says you can't build a future if you're chained to the past." She had an answer for everything, a smooth, polished, rehearsed answer that Bryce had surely fed her. I realized then that the freeze-out was complete. She wasn't my daughter anymore. She was a CEO, and I was just an old, emotional asset, a line item from the past that was no longer providing value. The real betrayal wasn't the legal papers I had signed. It was this hollowing out of everything we had been. The final, financial blow was coming. I knew it in my bones. At this point, it would just be a formality. The end of the line came on a Tuesday. It had been a month of escalating coldness, a month of me becoming a ghost in my own kitchen. The final straw was a phone call I overheard. I was in the walk-in cooler, and I heard Jessica in the office, her voice sharp and clear. "No, Bryce, I agree," she was saying. "The legacy protocols are inefficient. We'll have to phase her out sooner rather than later. I'll handle it." Legacy protocols. She was talking about my hands, my knowledge, my entire life's work, as if it were an outdated piece of software. Phase her out. The words were an eviction notice for my soul. The time for quiet acceptance was over. I had to make one last attempt to find my daughter inside the CEO she had become. I walked out of the cooler and stood in the office doorway. She was on her laptop, her face illuminated by the cold, blue light of a spreadsheet. She didn't look up. "Jessica," I said. My voice was quiet, but it held the weight of everything I was feeling. "1 second, Mom," she said, her fingers still flying across the keyboard. I waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the frantic clicking of the keys. She was making me wait, making it clear that her work was more important than her mother. Finally, she sighed and looked up, her eyes impatient. "What is it?" I took a step into the office. I didn't have a plan, only a desperate, aching need to break through the corporate shell she had built around herself. "I was cleaning out my desk at home," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I found the napkin from the old Northwood diner, the one where we first sketched the rolling pin logo. You drew a smiley face on it." She stared at me, her expression blank. There was no flicker of recognition, no softening. It was like I was speaking a language she no longer remembered. "We were so happy that day," I pushed on, my voice cracking. "We were a team. We were going to build something honest and good." "What happened to that, Jess? What happened to us?" "The business grew up," she said, her voice flat. "It's what we wanted." "No," I said, shaking my head, the tears I had been holding back finally starting to burn. "This isn't what I wanted. I wanted a bakery, not a factory. I wanted a partner, not a boss. This man, this Bryce, he is ripping the heart out of everything we built, and he is ripping the heart out of you, can't you see it?" I was pleading now, my voice raw. I was a mother begging for her daughter's life. I watched her face, searching for a sign, for any trace of the girl I raised. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a flicker of conflict in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a mask of cold resolve. She took a deep, steadying breath, and the words that came out of her mouth were not her own. They were his. They were polished, rehearsed, and utterly devastating. "Mom," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Feelings don't pay the bills. This is a multi-million-dollar business now, and it needs to be run like one, not like a hobby." She paused, letting the insult hang in the air between us. "Bryce says that to get to the next level, you have to be willing to trim the fat." Trim the fat. The ugly, impersonal, corporate phrase. It was a term used for budget lines and redundancies, not for people, not for your own mother. I stared at her, at the daughter I no longer recognized, and the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The legacy protocols. Phase her out, trim the fat. I was the fat. All the fight went out of me. It was like a string had been cut inside, and all my strength, all my hope, just collapsed into a heap. There was nothing more to say. You can't argue with an executioner. You can't reason with a stranger. The person I was trying to save was already gone. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked at her one last time, at the beautiful, empty shell of my daughter. Then I turned and walked out of the office. That was the last real conversation we ever had. I went back to my work, moving like an automaton, and for the next month, we barely spoke. I was just waiting. I didn't know what for, exactly. I just knew that the axe had been sharpened, and it was only a matter of time before it fell. And so the axe fell. The last month of the flashback blurred into the first week of my new, empty life. I was back in the present day, or what was left of it. I was living in the spare bedroom of my sister Karen's house, a refugee from my own life. For 7 days, the world had been a muffled, gray fog. I ate what Karen put in front of me, slept when my body gave out, and spent the hours in between staring at a wall, my mind blessedly, terrifyingly blank. The pain was too big to feel. It was a shapeless, crushing weight that had left me numb. "You have to eat something, Sarah," Karen said, pushing a bowl of soup toward me. It was the 3rd time that day. "I'm not hungry," I whispered. "Then you have to get angry," she shot back, her voice tight with a frustration I couldn't muster. "You can't just sit there and let her get away with this. You need to call a lawyer. You need to sue her for every penny you put into that place." "What's the point?" I said, the words feeling heavy and useless in my mouth. "The paperwork I signed, it's all legal." Bryce made sure of that. "And even if I could fight, what would I win? Money? It won't bring my daughter back. It won't fix what's broken." Karen threw her hands up in exasperation. "I'm not going to let you just dissolve. You're still here, Sar." She pointed to a stack of dusty cardboard boxes in the corner of the room. "Those have been in my attic for 10 years, since you moved out of the old house. We're going to go through them. Today. Right now. You're going to touch your own life again, even if I have to force you." It was easier to comply than to argue. Numbly, I knelt on the floor and pulled the lid off the top box. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air. It was a time capsule of a woman I no longer knew. There were my son's old report cards, a bundle of letters from my late husband, my nursing school diploma. Each object was a small, sharp pinprick in the fog of my numbness. It was a slow, agonizing archaeology of my own forgotten history. I was on the third box, my movements mechanical, when my fingers brushed against a stiff, manila folder tucked at the very bottom. It wasn't labeled. I almost tossed it into the discard pile, but some flicker of old habit, the accountant in me who never left a file unchecked, made me open it. Inside was a single, heavy piece of cardstock. It was an official-looking document with an embossed golden seal at the bottom from the United States Copyright Office, Library of Congress. I stared at it, my mind slowly trying to place the memory. And then it came back to me. It was from 10 years ago, long before the bakery was even a whisper of a dream. After my mother had passed, I'd spent a winter carefully transcribing all of my grandmother's recipes into a single collection, a way to preserve her memory. On a whim, my sister had convinced me to register it officially, to protect Grandma's legacy, she'd said. It had cost $80 and a trip to the post office. I hadn't thought about it since. My eyes traced the formal typed words. "Certificate of Registration," it read. And then the title, "The Miller Family Recipe Book." Author, Sarah Miller. The words just hung there in front of my eyes. And then my mind started to work again, for the first time in a week. The fog began to thin. I thought about the contents of that book. My grandmother's secret recipe for buttermilk biscuits, the precise 8-fold lamination technique for the croissants, the exact ratio of dark and milk chocolate for the Death by Chocolate cake, the lemon zest icing that had won us best in county. These weren't just recipes. They were assets. They were the legacy protocols Jessica was so eager to phase out. They were the intellectual property Bryce had talked about. They were the entire foundation of the Rolling Pins' success. And according to this official, legally binding document from the United States government, they didn't belong to the bakery. They didn't belong to the LLC. They didn't belong to Jessica. They belonged to me. I stood up, the document clutched in my hand. It felt heavier than a brick, more powerful than any contract Bryce's lawyers could ever draft. It predated the business, the investment, the partnership, the betrayal. It was an anchor to a truth they had tried to erase. They had stolen my company. They had stolen my daughter. But they had forgotten about my grandmother. They had forgotten about the power of the past. Karen looked at me, her eyes wide. "Sarah? What is it? You look different." I laid the certificate on the table. The golden seal caught the light. The numbness was gone, washed away by a surge of something cold, clear, and sharp. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even anger. It was resolve. A spark had been lit in the desolate, empty ruins of my life. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was about to use it to burn their entire empire to the ground. The next morning, my sister Karen found me at her kitchen table. I wasn't staring at the wall. I was on her laptop, and in front of me, laid out like a sacred text, was the copyright certificate. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a cold, hard clarity. I had spent a week grieving the death of my daughter. Now it was time to deal with the strangers who had taken her place. "You're up early," Karen said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. She looked at me, her expression cautious, as if I might shatter. "What are you doing?" "Research," I said, my voice even. "I'm looking for a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer or a corporate one. I need a specialist. someone who deals with intellectual property. Karen sat down opposite me, her eyes fixed on the certificate. So you are going to fight them? Are you going to sue? I took a sip of coffee. The warmth felt good. No, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. Suing is a declaration of war on their terms, in their language, the language of money. It would be a long, ugly, public battle that would drain what's left of my spirit. I'd be fighting for a piece of a company I no longer want. But they owe you, Sarah, she insisted. For everything. I know they do, I said, but this isn't about getting what I'm owed anymore. It's about taking back what is mine. Why would I call Jessica? To plead? To yell? The woman who would listen to that is gone. I'm dealing with a corporation now, and corporations don't have ears for mothers. They only have ears for lawyers. My revenge, I had decided in the dark hours of the night, would not be a fiery, emotional explosion. It would be a quiet, precise, and legal dismantling. I would not attack their fortress head-on. I would simply, calmly, reclaim the land their entire fortress was built upon. 2 days later, I was sitting in the quiet, book-lined office of a man named Mr. Chen. He was a small, older gentleman with kind eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He listened patiently for 20 minutes without interrupting once. I laid out the whole story, from the 401k to the cheap chocolate chips to the final, devastating conversation. When I was done, I slid the copyright certificate across his wide mahogany desk. He picked it up, handling it with a reverence that soothed my soul. He read it carefully, then turned to his computer and typed for a moment. He was looking up the public records at the U.S. Copyright Office. Well, he said, turning back to me, a small smile playing on his lips. The registration is valid, filed 10 years ago. It's ironclad. He leaned back in his leather chair. Miss Miller, let me give you an analogy. Your daughter and her partner have built a very impressive, very expensive skyscraper. But in their rush to build it, they forgot to check the deed. It turns out, you own the bedrock beneath the entire structure. They have built their empire on your land. For the first time in over a year, I felt a genuine sense of power. Not anger, not sadness, just the quiet, solid weight of the truth. So what are my options? I asked. Several, he said, ticking them off on his fingers. We could sue for years of copyright infringement. Given the bakery's profits, the damages would be substantial. Option 2, we could negotiate a licensing deal where they pay you a handsome royalty for every single item they sell that uses one of your recipes. Or, he paused, there is option 3. We can serve them with a formal cease and desist letter, demanding they immediately stop any and all use of your copyrighted intellectual property. Karen's voice was in my head, screaming, "Sue them! Take the money!" But I knew what I had to do. My decision was instant. Option 3, I said without hesitation. Mr. Chen raised an eyebrow. No negotiation? No settlement? A cease and desist is an injunction. It's a full stop. I don't want their money, Mr. Chen, I explained, my voice steady. Giving them a licensing deal would be like selling my grandmother's memories. Suing them for damages would trap me in a fight with them for years. I don't want to be tied to them anymore. I just want them to stop. I want them to stand in the middle of their soulless factory and realize they no longer own the secret. They can have the building, the trucks, the brand, but the heart of it all, the soul that has always been and will always be mine. A slow, appreciative nod from Mr. Chen. A very elegant and precise strategy, Miss Miller, he said. He turned to his computer and opened a new document. The cursor blinked on the blank white page. He typed the first words at the top of the letter. The 2 words that would become my Declaration of Independence, the 2 words that would bring their empire to its knees. Cease and desist. The letter was delivered by a process server at 10:15 a.m. on a Monday. I know because my lawyer, Mr. Chen, called me a moment later. The package has been delivered, was all he said. There was no fanfare, no explosion, just a quiet legal transaction that set an avalanche in motion. For a full day, there was only silence. My sister Karen and I sat in her house, the air thick with unspoken anticipation. It felt like we were waiting for a hurricane to make landfall, knowing we were safe on high ground, but still bracing for the storm. The first tremor came the following afternoon. Karen was scrolling through the local business journal's website on her phone. She suddenly gasped, holding the screen out for me to see. The headline was stark: Rolling Pins national franchise deal abruptly collapses. The article was short on details, citing only a sudden, unexpected complication regarding the brand's core asset portfolio. I felt a grim satisfaction. The bedrock was shifting. The next day, the main shockwave hit. A friend of Karen's who worked downtown sent her a text message with a photo. It was of the front of the bakery. The lights were off, the doors were locked, and a hastily printed sign was taped to the glass. It read, "Closed until further notice due to a supplier issue. A supplier issue." I suppose in a way that was true. Their main supplier, my history, my family, my knowledge had just been cut off. That evening, the final piece of the corporate structure crumbled. Karen got a call from another friend, a real gossip, whose condo overlooked Bryce's apartment building. She was practically breathless. "You will not believe this," she said, her voice crackling over the speakerphone. "Bryce is moving out. There's a U-Haul trailer attached to his Mercedes, and he's loading it up himself. He looks furious." The rat was fleeing the sinking ship. It was exactly as Mr. Chen had predicted. Investors like Bryce don't stick around when a company's value evaporates overnight. His promises were built on the empire, and the empire was built on my land. I hadn't torn their skyscraper down. I had simply and legally reclaimed my property. The structure, it turned out, couldn't levitate. It had come crashing down all on its own. I felt a strange sense of detachment, watching the ruin from a distance. There was no joy, no triumph, just the quiet, heavy finality of a war that was over. I had won. But I had lost my daughter long before the first shot was ever fired. That night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a name I thought I would never see again: Jessica. My heart gave a painful, reflexive lurch. For a moment, the mother in me, the foolish, hopeful, stubborn mother, wanted to answer. But the woman I was now, the one who had survived the fire, knew better. I watched the phone buzz and shake until it fell silent. A minute later, a notification appeared. Voicemail. I waited until Karen was asleep. I took the phone into the bathroom, closed the door, and pressed play, my hand steady. Her voice filled the small, quiet room. It wasn't the voice of the CEO. It was the frantic, gasping sob of a child who was lost in the woods. "Mom?" she began, her voice a ragged whisper choked with tears. "Mom, are you there? Please, please pick up. He's gone. Bryce is gone. He said the brand was worthless now. The investors pulled out. The bank is calling in the loans. They're taking everything." A long, shuddering sob. I went to the bakery and the locks were changed. Again. This time it was the bank. They put a notice on the door. It's all gone. Everything. She was weeping uncontrollably now, a raw, wounded sound that echoed in the deepest, most maternal part of my soul. A part of me ached for that crying girl. "I don't know what to do," she wailed. "I'm all alone. Mom, I'm so sorry. I was so stupid. He made me do it. I'm sorry. Please, you have to call me back. Please, Mom, I need you." The message ended. I stood in the silence, the echo of her words hanging in the air. She was sorry. She was sorry because she had lost, because Bryce had left her, because her world had collapsed. Her apology wasn't for me. It was for herself. She didn't need her mother back. She just needed a place to land. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my healing could not begin in the wreckage of her life. My peace did not require her apology. My future could not be built on the foundation of her regret. I took a deep breath. My thumb hovered over the screen, over the little red icon. Then I pressed it. Message deleted. 6 months later. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it does give you the space to build something new over the scars. My new place isn't big or fancy. There's no sleek corporate branding, no marketing plan tacked to the wall. There's just a simple, hand-painted sign on the window that reads, "Sarah's Originals," and every morning, there's a line out the door. The light in here is warmer. The space is smaller, yes, but it's filled with the rich, unmistakable smell of real butter browning in an oven, not the cheap, cloying scent of artificial flavorings. The sound isn't the frantic, impersonal roar of a business trying to scale. It's the happy chatter of neighbors, the gentle clink of coffee cups, and the sound of my own laughter, something I thought I had lost for good. I am not an employee here. I am not a legacy protocol, or a line item, or a problem to be solved. I am the founder. And this time, it's not just a title on an Instagram post. It's a fact I feel deep in my bones with every bag of flour I lift, with every customer I greet by name. "The usual, Mrs. Gable?" I ask the elderly woman at the front of the line. "You know it, Sarah," she says with a wink. "One of your grandmother's sticky buns. It's the only thing that gets my husband out of bed in the morning." Behind the counter with me is Maria, a young woman from the local culinary school with a fire in her eyes that reminds me of someone I used to know. But her fire is tempered with a deep, genuine respect for the craft. I'm not just her boss. I'm her teacher. "Okay, watch my hands," I tell her, as we work on a sheet of croissant dough. The final fold is the most important. You have to be gentle but firm. You're not forcing it. You're coaxing it. She watches, her focus absolute. "It's amazing," she says. "The book I have says to use a machine for this part. It says it's more efficient." I smile. "Efficiency is for factories, Maria. We're bakers. We make food with our hands and our hearts. That's a kind of magic that no machine can ever replicate. It's our secret ingredient. I am sharing my secrets now, not hoarding them. I am building a legacy, not a brand. And I am finally, for the first time in a long time, truly happy. The path to get here was a trial by fire. I had to walk through the ashes of my old life to find this new beginning. My 401k, the one I had cried over, wasn't lost. It was the price of my education. It bought me the most valuable lesson of my life. My worth is not determined by what I sacrifice for others, but by what I am willing to build for myself. Sometimes, in a quiet moment while I wait for the bread to rise, I think of Jessica. Do I miss her? I miss the daughter I raised, the little girl with the chocolate-smudged cheek. I have no idea where the stranger she became ended up, and I find that I don't need to know. I hope she finds her way, but my happiness is no longer a satellite orbiting hers. It is its own planet, with its own Sunday. My vindication wasn't the collapse of her company. It wasn't the desperate, deleted voicemail. My vindication is this: the weight of the keys to my own shop in my pocket, the proud smile on Maria's face when she pulls a perfect tray of croissants from the oven, the simple, profound joy of a customer taking a bite of something real and closing their eyes in delight. I didn't need to destroy her empire. I just needed to build my own small, beautiful, and authentic kingdom. I am not just a survivor of a great betrayal. I am the founder of a new life. I am reborn. Your value is not defined by what you give to others, but by the strength you find within yourself. For more stories of justice and reclamation, follow The Silent Lie.